refusal to accept the CIA's findings on Russian hacking, prompting new pushback by fellow Republicans and the Clinton campaign. Tonight, new information as to why U.S. intelligence officers suspect the hackers tried to help Trump win the election. Putin's pal. Sources say Trump is likely to choose ExxonMobil chief Rex Tillerson to become America's top diplomat. But some members of Trump's own party, they're spoiling for a fight right now, citing Tillerson's personal ties to the Russian president. Nuclear warning. There's rising tension in disputed international waters as China responds to provocative comments by President-elect Trump with an unprecedented show of force. Could it explode into a military conflict? An about-face on Obama. Trump denies he's planning to wipe out the 44th president's legacy, describing the current commander-in-chief as terrific. Tonight, insights into the post-election praise of the man he once bashed during the campaign. We want to welcome our viewers in the United States and around the world. I'm Wolf Blitzer. You're in the Situation Room. Tonight, President-elect Donald Trump is escalating his dispute with the U.S. intelligence community, rejecting findings that Russia tried to help him win the White House as ridiculous. The Trump camp now suggesting that intel about Russian hacking is part of a partisan conspiracy to delegitimize his presidency. There's a bipartisan push right now to further investigate claims that Moscow tried to influence the U.S. presidential election. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell says he backs the idea of a congressional investigation. The Clinton camp also weighing in. Former campaign chairman John Podesta is supporting calls for members of the Electoral College to get an intelligence briefing on Russian hacking. Some electors asking for the information before they vote next week, presumably to seal Donald Trump's election victory. The president-elect may be just hours away from revealing his choice for Secretary of State. Sources say ExxonMobil CEO Rex Tillerson remains the leading candidate, but there are increasing signs that Tillerson may face a confirmation fight in the Senate. Some top GOP senators, they're joining with Democrats right now in raising red flags about Tillerson's personal ties to Russia. We're also following an unprecedented military move in disputed waters where tensions have boiled over before. China flying nuclear-capable bombers over the South China Sea for the first time in an apparent warning to President-elect Trump. This after Trump questioned whether the United States should keep its long-standing policy that Taiwan is part of one China. We'll get reaction to all of this from a Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee, Congressman Andre Carson. And our correspondents and analysts and guests, they're all standing by as we bring you full coverage of the day's top stories. First, CNN's Ryan Nobles is over at Trump Tower in New York City. What's the latest as far as the transition, Ryan, is concerned?
Well, Wolf, it's been a busy day for Donald Trump here on Fifth Avenue as a parade of potential administration officials have made their way into Trump Tower. And as the Trump transition continues to take shape, the president-elect remains at the center of a fierce debate over the alleged role of Russia in an attempt to interfere in the presidential election. Tonight, Donald Trump refusing to accept CIA reports that conclude Russia actively attempted to intervene in the presidential election. Tweeting, "Can you imagine if the election results were the opposite and we tried to play the Russia CIA card? It would be called conspiracy theory." This just hours after flatly telling Fox News the same thing.
I think it's ridiculous. I think it's just another excuse. I don't believe it.
Trump also falsely claiming that the accusation of Russian interference never came up during the election, even though it did, and that hackers weren't caught in the act, which they were. Now a chorus of bipartisan senators are calling for a deeper probe.
It's clear the Russians interfered.
And Trump incorrectly suggests it's the Democrats, not the intelligence community, placing the blame on Russia.
I'm not sure they put it out. I think the Democrats are putting it out because they suffered one of the greatest defeats in the history of politics in this country. And frankly, I think they're putting it out, and it's ridiculous.
Which entirely misses the problem of a foreign entity attempting to undermine the integrity of the U.S. election. It makes any potential investigation challenging if Trump remains opposed to the effort once he takes office. But the Senate's most powerful Republican is also pushing back, arguing that the intelligence is correct and an investigation is needed.
I agree with Senator Schumer, Chairman McCain, Burr, and others This simply cannot be a partisan issue. The Russians are not our friends.
And now, the Clinton campaign is backing a demand from Electoral College electors for a full intelligence briefing on the matter ahead of their official vote on December 19th. This amid questions about Trump's likely pick for Secretary of State.
I am an American company.
ExxonMobil CEO Rex Tillerson and his close ties to Putin and Russia.
Follow the funds.
Florida Senator Marco Rubio, who sits on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, tweeting, "Being a friend of Vladimir is not an attribute I'm hoping for from a Secretary of State." These battles being waged as Trump continues to shape his upcoming administration. Making trips to Trump Tower today.
Really cool stuff in his office.
Former presidential candidate Carly Fiorina, former Congressman Alan West, and former Texas Governor Rick Perry, once a sharp critic of Trump, now considered as the next energy secretary, a department that as a presidential candidate, he suggested be shut down. And after a day of meetings here in New York City, Donald Trump will get back on the road. He'll wrap up his thank you tour this week with stops in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Florida, and Alabama. Wolf?
All right, Ryan, thanks very much. Ryan Noble's reporting for us tonight. We're also getting new information about the U.S. intelligence that President-elect Trump refuses to believe. What clues led U.S. intelligence officials to conclude that the hackers were trying to help Donald Trump win the presidential election? Our chief national security correspondent Jim Sciutto has been digging on this. What are you learning, Jim?
Well, tonight the new information is that hackers also breached several Republican targets, lawmakers, as well as Republican Party organizations as part of this broad hack. But one thing that's leading the intelligence community to believe that this hack was intended to primarily target or injure Hillary Clinton, hurt her chances, is that information from Republican sources was not released to the public. A former senior law enforcement official with direct knowledge of the inquiry tells CNN the investigation discovered Russian hacking of Republican entities, not just the Democratic National Committee and Hillary Clinton's top aide, John Podesta. CNN is told that hackers got hold of information from some Republican House members. Pundits, a third-party entity that held data for the Republican National Committee, and nonprofit groups tied to the party. Most of the information relating to the Republican Party was not released by hackers. That, in part, led the intelligence community to assess that Russia could have been acting to impact the election for Trump, though it was not clear whether this was truly for Trump or just to weaken Clinton. FBI investigators were not as convinced. Some of the data appears to have been outdated and perhaps of less value to hackers. Tonight, the White House said it believes it is clear who Russia was trying to help.
These were emails from the DNC and John Podesta, not from the RNC and Steve Bannon.
This has put President-elect Trump and his team at odds with the U.S. intelligence community over this assessment. The president-elect himself is questioning the assessment that Russia was involved in any election-related hacking at all.
Once they hack, if you don't catch them in the act, you're not going to catch them. They have no idea if it's Russia or China or somebody.
Trump's transition team is also disputing a report that the Republican National Committee was hacked as well, though no information was made public.
The intelligence is wrong because they're writing that the conclusion that they...
The key difference there. So Sean Spicer can make the argument credibly public in the way we saw this slow, almost daily drip of emails targeting the Democratic Party in those days leading up to the election.
Yeah, a lot of that information is so embarrassing and damaging to the Hillary Clinton campaign. Thanks very much, Jim Sciutto, reporting. Joining us now, cybersecurity expert Dmitry Alperovich. He has unique insight into the investigation of the Russian hacking. Dmitry, thanks very much for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so your firm, CrowdStrike, investigated the cyber attacks on the Democratic National Committee. Why are you so certain that the Russians did it?
Well, President-elect Trump said yesterday and today again that you have to catch these hackers in the act. And actually, he may not be aware, he may not have been briefed that our firm CrowdStrike actually did catch them in the act when the DNC hired us back in May, we actually came in and deployed our technology called Falcon on all the systems inside their corporate network. We actually watched these adversaries for a number of days and weeks as we were preparing to kick them out.
Who were these adversaries? Who were these people that were actually doing the hacking of the DNC?
There were two groups, two independently working groups that we associate with Russian intelligence agencies. One of them we associate with GRU, the primary military intelligence agency in Russia that is responsible for what in Russia they call active measures, disinformation campaigns such as this. They're also responsible for the takeover of Crimea. You may remember the little green man taking over military bases in Crimea. Putin had actually admitted that these were GRU operatives.
So where were these people based? Where were they doing the hacking from?
Well, we can't get that specific, but we know that the headquarters of the GRU is in Moscow.
We know the GRU, but the hackers, you say, were working for the GRU, which is the major Russian intelligence agency.
We believe they're affiliated with them. Highly likely that these are actually GRU operatives, people in military uniforms working out of buildings in Moscow, perhaps the headquarters that's nicknamed the Aquarium in Moscow, but perhaps contractors also working on behalf of the GRU.
So you say you caught them in the act of actually doing this to the Democratic National Committee. Talk to us about that. How do you do that?
Well, the Democratic National Committee suspected that something may be wrong. They brought us in early May, and we deployed our technology, this Falcon technology, across all their systems, and we immediately picked up the trace of these two attackers. We saw them going after email communication servers, stealing emails from the DNC for a period of 9 months, going back to 2015, and then going after sensitive documents that the campaign was preparing on Donald Trump and other Republican candidates that were running for the primary.
And so the working assumption is that the GRU, the Russian intelligence agency, then gave these documents, all these emails, to WikiLeaks, and then WikiLeaks would release them on a daily basis. Is that your understanding?
Well, we actually had two other leaking campaigns that were set up, an organization called DC Leaks, and then Guccifer 2.0 character that popped up, and both of them started leaking this information initially, and then Guccifer actually claimed on Twitter that he had given the information to WikiLeaks, providing a direct connection from Guccifer to the WikiLeaks dumps of emails.
What is your reaction when you hear John Bolton, the former U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, a man considered possibly a deputy secretary of state in a Trump administration, saying this could have been what he calls a false flag?
Well, you can never discount that, but the evidence here is overwhelming. We looked at all the forensic evidence. We had the FBI and the intelligence community confirm publicly in October independently that they believe the Russians were behind this hack. And the thing that you have to understand is that we've been tracking these groups, these intelligence agencies, for years. In fact, one of them, the GRU, has been active since mid-2000s. So we have over 10 years of history of their campaigns, literally hundreds of intrusions into different organizations.
How high is your level of certainty that the Russians did this?
We have very high level of confidence that Russian intelligence agencies were behind it.
And is it your understanding that the U.S. intelligence community agrees with you?
Yes, absolutely. They would not have come out in October with a public statement from the head of the DNI and the DHS. And then what we're looking at, just the forensic evidence, they may have human sources inside Russia. They may have signal intelligence that suggests specifically the people that may be behind this. So hopefully they're briefing him on this.
Has the Republican National Committee asked you to come in and do a similar investigation into whether they were hacked?
They have not, but we are working with other organizations on the Republican side. We're nonpartisan. We work with both sides.
And have they been hacked similarly? Other Republican-related organizations?
And Republican operatives that have been hacked by the Russians.
When you say operatives, what does that mean?
People with the Republican Party.
Political operatives, if you will, because that's what Mike McCall, the originally he said on our show that that he believed the Republican National Committee was hacked. He said that was a misstatement. He later issued.
We saw some operatives in the Republican Party actually again released their emails on DC Leaks. That has not gotten a lot of attention, but certainly not in the volume and scope of the DNC hack.
Dmitry Alperovitch, thanks so much for coming in.
Thank you.
We'll continue this conversation. In the last hour, we spoke to Donald Trump ally, the former House Intelligence Committee Chairman here in the United States, but was actually working to try to get Donald Trump elected president.
Well, my personal opinion is that I'm back to a system that is non-electronic as it relates to our local and federally elected positions.
Why would
elections?
Why do you believe Russian hackers potentially could sit on stolen information from Republican targets, whether members of Congress, Republican pundits, an RNC vendor, and not release that information as opposed to releasing information that was embarrassing to the Democrats and Hillary Clinton's campaign?
Well, I think we're still gathering additional information as we speak. I think that the Senate Intelligence Committee, the House Intelligence Committee, we will certainly have hearings related to unearthing these matters going forward, as well as working with House and Senate leaders in terms of pressing the issue to get to the root causes. But it seems as if Mr. Trump's language, his overtures to Russia, could have been a motivating factor. That is not to say that Mr. Trump gave a directive or was in concert with the Russian government, but it is to suggest that his favorable comments throughout the campaign opened the door for the Russian government to feel as if they have an ally in the White House, and that is very troubling for our national security.
I want you to stand by, Congressman. We're getting some breaking news coming into the Situation Room, but we got to take a quick break. We'll resume this conversation, share the new information we're getting right after this.
Where will the lead take us today? Straight to the source.
Would Israel be willing to go along with those demands?
To a side you haven't seen.
That sounds a young man's game.
All the way to the heart of a problem.
What is going on in Ferguson, Missouri, in downtown America?
Maybe all the way to the president.
Do you think you were naive back then?
The Lead with Jake Tapper. Weekdays at 4.
Every day we do stories about people in need. With CNN's Impact Your World, you can help. When you go to the Impact Your World section at CNN.com, you'll find more on the stories that move you. Plus, you can find out just what you can do to help. Links to reputable charities.